With less than a week from Aventurine's banner leaving, Fuxuan rerunning next patch, and HuoHuo most definitely coming very soon as well, I think it's time we have a little discussion on our premium 5-star sustain units. Now let's get this out of the way before we start. No, I didn't forget Luocha. I just think he isn't really in the running to be the best anymore. He still is a very good unit who can carry you through pretty much all content in the game just by making you unkillable, but he isn't really heads and shoulders above any of the other guys in sustaining. So this means his lack of offense and utility doesn't really let him be included in this conversation. Now this also doesn't mean the other guys are miles above him because of their offensive abilities. He just has none at all. So while all the sustains are pretty close together in terms of overall value, luocha is still going to be under the other guys even if it's just by a little bit. And even if you want to just ignore all logic and fully insist that luocha is still the best, his banner just left, so there isn't much point talking about him when the others are either already here or rerunning very soon. Alright, let's start with the earliest of the three, Fuxuan. When she's not yapping about divination, omniscia, and whatever other big words she uses, Fuxuan is one of the best sustains in the game. For her strengths, she has a very unique way of sustaining where she mitigates and redirects damage to herself. For some, this may be the superior way of sustaining, as it's more preventative rather than reactive like healing. Accidental one-shots from multiple enemies going in a row and targeting one ally isn't going to happen with Fuxuan on your team. Now her skills field also gives all allies 12% crit rate, which is honestly not a buff that should be overlooked. The fact that she's quantum allows her to be played in the popular mono quantum team without griefing Silverwolf's weakness implant. She is really easy to build as she just takes any defensive 2-piece combined with another defensive 2-piece or a 2-piece speed, and she doesn't need to be built super fast, so speed is not a substat that you need to look for. She only wants HP percent and defense percent, and even then it's not that important in the substats. Her skill will also provide a 100% CC debuff resist once per field. If it's an AoE debuff like Kafka's Mind Control, Fuxuan can let your team completely ignore this mechanic. Her skill does also give a little bit of HP to everyone, so for HP scalers like Blade or any future ones, this is a pretty decent buff for their damage. And then finally, she is spill point positive as her field does last 3 turns. Now with all that in mind, Fuxuan isn't the perfect unit, no one is after all, so she does come with some negatives. If you are a simulated universe guy, in high difficulty sim universe, mainly in Swarm or Golden Gears, Fuxuan can struggle to sustain as she often gets one-shot by large AoE attacks. This enemy here can completely screw over Fuxuan, as the debuff they provide will reduce everyone's max HP by 30%. The way Fuxuan's talent works with this debuff on her, she will still flip and heal at 50% of her normal health, but she can't recover that 30% that's been taken away. Basically, she's gonna waste her emergency heals as it's going to activate when she doesn't even take that much damage, and it's only going to heal her to 70% of her max HP. Against enemies with a lot of CC debuffs, like this dude, her CC resist trace is not going to be able to stop every single debuff, and because she doesn't have a dispel, you're just going to have to wait once one of your characters does get CC'd. Finally, this might honestly be a positive for some people, but her traces, all these crit rate ones, are pretty much useless. It would have been nice if it was something useful like defense percent or even speed, but I guess for people struggling with resources, you don't need to waste any leveling on them. Okay, on to our next contender, which is the embodiment of crippling anxiety, and that's our little fox girl, HuoHuo. For HuoHuo, she goes with the basic way of sustaining, which is just healing. Her heals are really good though, as her skill is an AoE one with a dispel, and its multipliers are comparable to some of the 4-star characters' ultimates. Her talent also allows her to heal and dispel out of turn, which can be very useful. This happens when a character uses an ultimate or starts their turn, which means as long as her talent is active, CC debuffs won't actually affect your turns. HuoHuo is also very easy to build, as she just functions with random 2-pieces as well, and you pretty much only need main stats. She does prefer to play fast though, so if possible you would want to give her a lot of speed, but it's not a necessity, as long as you're over 134, which should be easy. Her ultimate provides a 40% attack buff and regens energy for all allies by an amount equal to 20% of their max energy. This attack buff is really big and should not be underestimated at all, but the energy regen is absolutely insane. Energy regen is a pretty rare mechanic in Star Rail, as it only shows up on some light cones and Ting Yun. The ability to just give all allies energy can help you speed up rotations and could potentially take entire cycles off MOC or pure fiction clears. This energy buff alone honestly honestly should take up like 2 to 3 pros for HuoHuo. And then finally a smaller one, her technique is a debuff that can be useful for characters like Ratio and Acheron, but it's only going to be on that first turn. Now for her cons, like I said before, technically reactive sustains like healing is not as good as preventative ones like shielding or fuxuan. If for some reason one of your allies does get focused a lot and is about to die, HuoHuo does not have any emergency heals to save them. Following on from that, I would say HuoHuo is the weakest at sustaining out of all the other limited ones, including luocha. If you are genuinely struggling to survive, which should be rare but it could happen, you will need to use a decent amount of skill points on her to keep everyone up. Following on from there, to have good ult uptime, you're probably going to need to use more skill points compared to other sustains. She's also going to just require more effort to play compared to Fuxuan, luocha, and Aventurine, as you're going to have to balance the team's skill points with HuoHuo's own energy. Now for our final contender who's on the banner right now, it's Aventurine. Now Aventurine has amazing shields that can easily be applied without using many skill points at all, and along Fuxuan, I would say he's the best sustain we have, as they once again prevent or mitigate damage instead of reacting after the damage is dealt. His ult has a nice debuff, increasing incoming crit damage by 15%, but the main utility is how it's just a debuff in the first place. This helps units like Ratio and Acheron a lot, as well as other DPS units that might be trying to utilize the Pioneer Relic set. Instead of buffing his teammates, Aventurine opts for his offensive capabilities to be his own personal damage, which can honestly be a really good amount if you invest into him. He also provides huge amounts of effect res to everyone on the team, which helps with resisting debuffs and CC, but also allows supports to build Broken Keel without having to find effect res in their own relics. If you are a simulated universe nut, Aventurine is probably the best out of sustains in higher difficulty. Preservation blessings are really strong, and Aventurine can easily make your team unkillable with the right ones. He'll also not let one-shots occur at all, and since healing blessings are quite common, you won't have to worry even if some damage does get through the shields. Now for his negatives, Aventurine is by far the hardest sustain unit to build. If you want to just make him a full shielder, then it's not a problem at all, but if you're trying to build him properly, you're going to have to look for crit substats. Defense substats are also going to be just as important, because without his signature light cone or Japard's light cone, it can be really hard to hit 4000 defense. He does also want speed, but normally just to hit 134, so it's not as important as the other guys. Now more on his relics, while 2-piece is fine, his better relics is the Knight of Purity Palace, which is a pretty terrible cavern to farm. The lightning set is no longer best in slot on the DPS units that want it, so unless you're also building Jeopard, Fire MC, or March, you'll be farming this cavern just for Aventurine. And finally, while he does have CC resistance himself, and he gives everyone a lot of effect res, if a CC from enemies does get through, which can easily happen, Aventurine does not have any way to cleanse it, so you're just gonna have to wait, which can be annoying. Okay, now that we know the good and bad of each of these guys, which one's the best? Well, you shouldn't be surprised, but there isn't one answer. It's really hard to compare the buffs and damage they are providing for the team. For example, in an Imbibe the Lunae team, it's really hard to tell you exactly whether 12% crit rate, 40% attack plus energy regen, or Aventurine's personal damage is gonna be the best. Maybe your Dan Heng clears so fast that HuoHuo's extra energy doesn't actually do anything. Maybe you're like me and your best Imbibe the Lunae build doesn't need crit rate at all, so Fuxuan's buff is useless. Or maybe your Aventurine build is not that great, so he's really just there to shield and give 15 crit damage occasionally. There's a lot of factors that play into which one is going to be better for you personally, but these characters do have some teams they do work really well in, so we can quickly go through that. For dot teams, HuoHuo is generally going to be your best option. More energy for more ult is obviously important, and that's not just for dot teams, but the attack percent specifically helps make your dots do a lot more damage. Fuxuan's crit buff here won't be useful at all since dot characters aren't playing to crit. Aventurine would still be good, but his ult debuff would also be useless, so it really is just his personal damage making the difference, which is still better than Fuxuan to be fair. Now for follow-up teams, Aventurine is going to be the premium option. His follow-ups can do very decent damage, especially when he's getting some team-wide buffs like Ranmei, but more importantly, when teammates do follow-ups, it helps stack his talent. So in a follow-up team, all the attacks other characters like Ratio or Topaz are throwing will help funnel Aventurine's own follow-ups. Now with Topaz specifically, since Numbi advances every time a teammate throws a follow-up, Aventurine will also help increase Topaz's damage. And finally for Fuxuan, very simple, just the fact that she's quantum makes her the only option in a mono quantum team, so Silverwolf's implant doesn't get griefed. Now I know I just hyped up all these characters in their teams, but this also doesn't mean that using each other is gonna be necessarily worse. It could even be better. For example, in a dot team, if your Aventurine is really high investment, so maybe with his signature light cone, his personal damage could just flat out give a bigger increase than HuoHuo's buffs. Same in a follow-up team, if HuoHuo's energy is allowing Ratio and Topaz to get extra ults in a clear, that is definitely going to be more damage than a middle to low investment Aventurine can give. And finally, again, Fuxuan is the only option if you play mono quantum, but if you're not playing Silverwolf and maybe using Tingyun instead, which honestly might be the better team, then Fuxuan doesn't matter at all. Now yes, all this talk has been really wishy-washy, so here I'll try and give you guys a straight answer. For purely sustaining, so keeping your teams alive, I would say Aventurine and Fuxuan are equal first. I'll even throw in luocha at third, and at last is HuoHuo. But remember, they can all sustain pretty much every content in the game, and they're all close enough where it's essentially equal. For utility, so this includes buffing and personal damage, I would honestly put HuoHuo as the top, Aventurine very close behind, but at second, Fuxuan at third, and then luocha at the bottom. At the end of the day, it's honestly up to you which one you prefer, as they can all do the job, but if you are dedicating to a specific team, you can try and pick one that works best for you. Hope this video was helpful and would appreciate a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.